Good morning. Welcome to Freeway Bible Study. This is Genesis 2. Let me get myself out on the road. Just leaving my apartment, headed to work. Feels like it sometimes. The road is wet. Check that out. We had a lot of rain last night. And here in Southern California, rain is kind of a rarity. So I have to be extra careful. It's slippery. So let's take a cautious ride up to Riverside. So I need to go straight to get onto the freeway right here, but I can't do that because my bike just doesn't have enough mass to get picked up by the sensor right there. So I have to come over here, make a right turn, go over here by the DoubleTree, and then swing around, and then hang a U-E, and then I can get on the freeway. And then I'll get started. So let's do our little U-E here carefully, given the wet ground. Slippery. There we go. And now, look alright, look at the sunrise over there. Oh, I got a green. Good lucky me. So this is my second video in the Freeway Bible Study series. I started off yesterday calling this an atheist Bible study, but two things. One, I realized someone else had already used that. And two, I didn't like it so much. You know, 'cause it's loaded. You know, it makes it come in like, oh, okay, this is some non-believer bashing the Bible. Not that I won't do that, but it's not my first aim. So Freeway Bible Study is a little better, although it may take people by surprise if I don't get to it right away and let them know that I'm a non-believer. They may think that, you know, I'm Pastor Softypapa, who's found an interesting venue on his commute to preach, which is certainly not. I don't want to labor under misapprehensions. Is that the right way to say it? I don't want to give false impressions. So I should probably lead off with something saying I'm a non-believer who enjoys reading and studying the Bible, and who has found that recording and sharing that my readings helps me to do a better job. And let's jump right into that particular point. Wow. So so in my normal course of my thing, I would have listened to Genesis 1 like I did yesterday, and I would have gotten to the end, I would have stopped, I would have thought about it for a mile or two, and then I would have moved on to something else. Yesterday, as a result of making the video that I did, I talked for 16 minutes on the topic. I never would have spent 16 minutes talking about it before. A lot of that was talking about other stuff, but it was all good. It was all good stuff. Good use of time. So I spent a lot of time talking about it, or thinking about it, and talking about it, and then I uploaded it, and I found that prompted me to want to do it, knowing that I was going to try chapter 2 today, prompted me to want to do a better job today. So I actually did. I went back and reread chapter 1 and chapter 2 actually ahead of time, and then I listened to it as well while I was cooking my eggs. So I'm all briefed ahead of time. So I skipped. So look at that, good use of time. I skipped my normal diet of political news, and which is about 40% commercials from 5:15 to 5:15 to 5:50, and instead spent that time reading and studying the Bible. Who wouldn't say that that's a better trade-off? I think that's a much better thing to do. So let's jump into it. And this is the thing, since I can't take notes, although maybe I'll try something. Maybe I'll take a sticky pad and take notes and then plaster them to the windshield, and then I can have something to reference on, because I think of things while I'm reading and listening before I start the bike, but then I can't recall them. So let me go by memory. So first off, let's go talk about the difference between chapter 1 and chapter 2. In chapter 1, of course, which I covered yesterday, God creates the cosmos in a beautiful lyrical story of almost layering bits of creation, one atop the other. And then in chapter 2, and including on the 6th day, man and woman, who he whom he created, am I getting it backwards? I think he created them by by taking the dust of the earth and breathing into it and creating them in that way. And then chapter 2, God is, that's after the 6th day, so I'm imagining this is on the 7th day. God is talking to his creation, or giving them instructions. Well, first of all, it's man alone. He's just got man. And so he realizes that that's kind of a lonely affair, so he wants to give man a helpmeet, whatever that is. And he's going to, he tries out all the animals. It's like, let's create a parade of all the animals that I've created, including cattle, interestingly. So God created cattle off the bat, so that means that they didn't evolve from, archetypal beasts of the field into the cows and the sheep and the like that we know today, but they were created outright. So he lines them all up, and Adam presents them to Adam, and Adam gives them a name, and he's like, here's a hippopotamus, and you can tell Adam's a little lonely. Okay, here's a gazelle. Spring away, bang, boing, boing. Here's a snake. Watch out for that thing. Yeah, it's God may whisper over his shoulders. Keep an eye on that one. Well, actually, it didn't slither away then. I think it had feet. I'm getting ahead of myself though. And so, but God can see that none of these candidate helpmeets are much satisfaction to Adam. So God comes up with an idea. Hey, Adam, why don't you've had a long day naming everything. So why don't you kind of lay down here on the soft earth here in Eden, in an interesting place, Eden, huh? Very interesting place. Kind of makes a lot of sense if you think about, because you got to look at this from the perspective of the people who wrote it, who were agrarian sheep herders. Basically agriculture was their thing. The wilderness was something to be tamed, to be beaten and fought back. The howling wild, and to till and what is the word? Tame the wild, to create a little cordoned off area to call your own. I've done that as a gardener. I remember my big 1-acre estate that I had. I picked off a piece of land back there, and I went back and I beat back all the weeds and the snakes and everything, and put up a little fence and tilled the ground and loved it and cared for it. And so the garden amidst creation, the Garden of Eden amidst the creation, is that same concept. So interesting, kind of revealing of the mind of the people who may have written these stories. So anyway, Adam takes a nap, and God pulls out a rib, and then seals over the wound, and creates from that rib a woman who is there to be a helper to man. That's an interesting footnote, because that gets interpreted that a lot in interesting ways later. And it's interesting, if you're a woman, to then consider yourself, dare I say, an afterthought. It's like kind of like, well, we're also this room looks great, but wouldn't it be great to have a love seat in the corner? This creation is all pretty trick and neat, but wouldn't it be great to have a helpmeet so that man doesn't get so depressed? And give him something. And sorry if I'm cutting over into being vulgar, but I think it makes sense. And to give him something to do with that thing between his legs. Again, apologize, but if I'm imagining that God made man initially with a weenie and testicles and reproductive urges, and if he did so in absence of an object of those passions, initially having that in mind, then that was interesting. So if that would indicate, we could say that, well, God had meant to do this all along. Well, you could say in chapter 1 that he did it all along, because in chapter 1 woman was created as well. So what's up with that? Wow. So okay, well, I've got a thought for that. Let me take a side on that. A real aside. Forgive me. So when I was in college, two of my buddies, John and Eric, I don't know what they were up to one night, but they decided to create a religion. And they were kind of one of those, drunken college larks, very, very juvenile things. And they created this thing called the Gird. And the Gird was basically God ruling the universe. And then just simply the Gird one day in his leisure imagined, I wonder if there could be something even still more greater than me. And when he imagined that, poof, God came into existence. So the Gird willed God into existence by virtue of Gird imagining something greater. I think there's something that has to do with this is almost like the Kalam cosmological argument in a way, in a way, not really, but kind of willing it into existence by necessity, filling a void in cognition. But anyway, the God in this model, it was utterly irrelevant. Didn't even notice the Gird. I mean, God went off immediately, did great godlike things, creating galaxies, and adjudicating the universe's injustices, and like. Meanwhile, Gird was on Earth and was really impressed with his creation. It's like wow. It's like you're a parent and you created gave birth to a kid that's like a super genius, and you're like in awe. You created it. It's yours, but in some ways it dwarfs you. In some ways. So Gird, of course, then wants to impress God, who doesn't even notice him. So Gird comes up with all these rituals and the like to basically appease God. And one of those rituals, and I remember doing this with the guys, was going to Pizza Hut in McKinleyville, because this all happened up in Arcata. Pizza Hut in McKinleyville, and we actually did this. I watched them because it was their religion. I was just kind of along for the ride. My part comes in just a second. So we went up to the Pizza Hut. I sat in the car. I stood outside, and they both went outside, and they were saying, "Whoa, great God, we're not worthy. Please don't step on us." And they were basically emulating what the Gird's propitiation to this God that it had created. Excuse me, I have to scratch my eye. And the fact that God, and I remember them getting so animated in their discussions. We would sit around and talk, and Eric and John would get so excited talking about the Gird and God, and the story would change, and they would come up with stuff. Eventually they schismed into two sects because they couldn't agree on how to spell Gird. One was G-U-R-D and the other one was G-E-R-D. And I was there to witness that schism when John suddenly proclaimed, "Blasphemy! Blasphemer!" at Eric, saying, "You're a heretic. How can you spelling it wrong?" And they they literally stood up and stormed off. They were roommates. They stormed off into each other's rooms because they couldn't agree on the spelling. But anyway, I would watch these guys work as they developed their religion, and I remember that they would rev up different parts of the story when one would come up with a slightly better idea than the other, or they did both agree. And the way that man and woman were created seemingly twice in not man. Well, I guess man was. But the way they were created twice, or was man created just once? I don't know. Can't remember. In Genesis chapter 1 and 2 reminds me of what I would watch those guys do when Eric and John would be sitting there talking, and John would say, "Well, we got the creation story. So God was all, the Gird was on Earth, taking care of things, all this beautiful stuff, and just one day one day God showed up out of nowhere." Okay, so that would be like Genesis 1, right? So that God showed up. God was created in that manner, just by appearing. And then later, maybe an hour later in our discussions, they would say, Eric would say instead, no. What would be much cooler is if instead of God just showing up, the Gird is imagining something greater than himself. And poof, God comes into existence. And they're both like, yeah. And they agree upon it. And now imagine if they were writing this down, which they actually did after a while. They were writing this down, and that would be chapter 1 and chapter 2, two separate creation stories, and they forgot to go back and edit what they had written in chapter 1. That's exactly what I see when I read chapter 1 and chapter 2 of the Bible, of Genesis, and I see the chapter 1 and chapter 2 of Genesis, with the book of Genesis, and I see the different creation stories. What's interesting to me is how for other people that doesn't seem to be a problem. They just kind of read past that, and maybe this is a chance to share with believers the way of thinking of people like myself. Well, I'm incapable of skipping past that. When I see those differences, I'm like, wait a minute, what's happened here? Did we just do that? Well, you know, I literally turn one page back, and there's God creating God of, you know, kind of like and there's kind of, you know, out of mud, which is clearly, you know, borrowing from ancient tradition. That's an old Egyptian trick, you know, creating the golem by taking up some mud from the Nile and breathing life into it. You know, there we go again with the god of the air, you know, breathing life into it, and it becomes animate. Lots of old Mesopotamian traditions have that breathing of life into earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust type of thing. So, and then to see that twice, I mean, I can't skip past that. I can't just settle on that. That needs to be explained, because that is evidence of reckless human authorship. That's evidence of like Eric and John in a semi-intoxicated brainstorm, coming up with a story and losing track of the narrative. It's got to make sense. To my mind, if a deity, especially the deity described in the Judeo-Christian tradition, especially if an omnipotent, omnipresent, all the omni things, God is creating, or is laying down a story to share how things happen, that story is probably going to be the clearest, cleanest narrative that you can possibly imagine. So let me just diverge for one more second, and I'm not going to run out of time, so I'm not going to be able to cover everything. So as a project manager, one of my jobs, well, actually as an analyst, a business analyst, one of my jobs is to write documentation. And my goal of that documentation is to write a document that's very clear, that if I can go into a room of 10 stakeholders and give them a risk assessment, they're all going to read that risk assessment. And if I take them all separately into a separate room and ask them, can you tell me can you identify what the risk is and what the recommended methods of addressing that risk are, or what the options are, and then the recommendation, and they're all going to give me a very clear description, and they're all going to align. If I'm a good analyst, if I'm a good writer, all 10 of my stakeholders are going to come away with the same impression from that. That's what I would imagine an all-powerful creator producing in their story, something that is that clear. And if we're just to take a little further, I've got a coworker that's my senior in terms of her experience, and use the Japanese word senpai. She's my senpai. She's the one that's gone before. She's much better at writing business documentation than I am. And when I write documents on my own and I take them to stakeholders, I'm all over the place. Because you guys, if you've seen my writing style, it's, you know, flourishing semicolons and commas and dashes everywhere, and paragraphs that are made of 14 sentences and sentences that run the length of a paragraph and use all these unnecessary vocabulary. That's just the way I write. So that's terrible. You can't write a business report in poetry. Everyone's going to be confused. And the Bible is in essence poetry. Maybe that's the distinction. Maybe God meant it to be that way, but that has consequences in confusion. But if I run my draft by my coworker before I give it to my stakeholder, she's able to help me refine my writing to make it much clearer. And it delivers, it does the job better. Even better still is if she writes it herself. It's a thing of beauty. In fact, I make templates for my projects, and I leverage her content all the time. I take her documents, her charters, and her project plans, and just make them into templates using her content. Say, this is how it should be done. So what the point is that a good author, and I'm imagining that God would be the best author ever, would create a narrative that would not be subject to misinterpretation. In fact, it would be so clear. If I was if I was a deity writing my narrative, it would be something. It wouldn't be anything like written text, and it certainly wouldn't be limited to a single language. It would be something like this. I would bury in pi, the 3.2, 3.12126 thing, the numbers that just go on forever, I would bury in pi, and I apologize if I seem to be presumptuous to imagine that I'm God, but this is how I would communicate my message. I would bury in pi, because it's an infinite length of numbers, somewhere in there, the words I am here, or some meaning, something that basically, maybe it's a binary thing that says I am here, in not only every language of our planet, but every language of every sentient creature in the universe. So that if you examine pi far enough, and we have supercomputers that can delve deeply into pi, you will eventually begin to uncover patterns. You will see a message buried in this as I am here. And what do you know? If you look in the Swahili, a little further in Swahili, there it is there somewhere else. Maybe it's 600 billion decimal places in, but it's there. And likewise, all the language of the universe, which we wouldn't even know what those are, but we would recognize our own. That would give me pause. That would, if we somehow discovered in supercomputer calculation, instead of making bitcoins, we're delving into pi, we're uncovering I am here in every language in the world, I'd have to shut up. And what more, if I was God, what I would do is when that moment happens that I see I am here, I would immediately, if I open my mind to that would be like pushing the I accept button on a download of software. I would download my mandate and my message right into the cortex, the mind or the soul of the individual who thus accepted, in an unequivocal, impervious to interpretation way, so that everyone would have the blueprint for my message and the message itself in their head. There would be no schism. There would be no 30,000 sects of Christianity, and gosh only knows how many religions out there. They would all be of one message, and then that would still leave us with the ability to have free will. That, as an atheist, I would be in a really difficult position in terms of being able to reject that. I'd probably accept it. So I'm going to wrap up now because I'm out of time, because this is where I start the good life. That's what I see. That's what I get out of Genesis chapters 1 and 2. They're beautiful stories. All the evidence and markings of being human made, and if they were inspired by God, He didn't do a very good job. It would, like if I go to my coworker and I asked her for help, and I said, "Can you help me to write this business case?" And she didn't do it. She didn't really pay much attention to me. Didn't help me very much. It would still come out pretty sloppy. I would imagine the Creator would, even if it was inspired, it would be a much cleaner, much better contradiction. Things that would raise the eyebrows of a skeptic like me would not be there, and I would have little recourse but to really consider that it's possibly true, and that's not the case. So right off the bat, Genesis chapter 1 and 2, solidified, pounding hard the metaphor fails away. The nails of my skepticism. That what does that mean? I'm right off the bat. My skepticism is hardened against whatever's coming, because it's got all the hallmarks of a human-made mythology, no different than thousands, tens of thousands of mythologies that have gone before and are yet to come. And with that, I'll stop. That's the end of my Freeway Bible study for this particular day, covering Genesis 2. And with that, I'll get started on the Good Life meditation. I'm about 3 miles too late. I'll have to go fast. Take care, everybody. Have a great day. Bye-bye.